My oldest son, Chase, he never saw a boundary that he didn't want to jump way far over. He didn't want to just jump across. He wanted to blow up all boundaries that existed. When I was a kid, my greatest fear in the whole world was getting in trouble at school. But Chase saw getting in trouble at school as like a great challenge that he must accept with his whole being. It's almost like he embraced the principal's office or a visit or an email home. And as a mom, I hated being on the first name base with the principal. So here's my question for you today. How do you talk to your kids when they just screw up? When Chase was in junior high, he thought he would get a laugh or some notoriety by hacking into the school's computer system. I'm not kidding, people. He hacked into the computers at school, and he uploaded a funny but not at all appropriate picture on all of the school iPads. It was terrible. But of course, the technology guy could figure out who it was that logged in order to hack and upload this picture on all the school's iPads. And the principal called me. I was both mortified by his choice and also kind of impressed by his skills. And honestly, I think that the principal kind of was too. You see, parenting Chase was left me feeling often like I was somehow failing, like I couldn't get the right parenting formula to work, or I couldn't understand him well enough to get him to work, and I spent hours crying and reading parenting books and parenting blogs and emailing teachers and advocating for him and apologizing for him, kind of doing all the things in order to try and keep him going through life. Friends, those years, they gave me some tips for you. You can learn from what I learned. So here's our question. How do we talk to our kids when they screw up? When they're little, we're so tempted to just do the counting thing. You know what I'm talking about. The 1, 2, time out if 3 is like some kind of threat against the behavior. Well, most of the time that you can just sort of redirect them and change the behavior, they'll take up an interest in something else anyway. The thing I learned early on is that consequences, when it comes to our kids, they need to make sense. Counting doesn't actually make sense when what they're choosing as a toddler. Counting doesn't make sense, but taking away an argued upon toy, that does make sense. Grounding a kid because he didn't turn in his homework doesn't make sense, but allowing him to get an F because he didn't turn in his homework, that makes sense. The only ego involved in that is usually us as the parents. Sometimes as parents, we want to just make it easiest for us, but the problem solving then doesn't become effective. I heard a parenting teacher talk about it this way. Let's use me as an example. Let's say that I had a really bad day at work. I had this terrible day at work, and I got home, and Ryan looked at me, and he had a face when I walked in. He looked at me and said, "You know what, Angie? Honey, your sermon wasn't very good. It was like a C- at best. I think that you're kind of delinquent in your skills, and I think that you're going to need to go upstairs and work on your sermon skills so that you can go and give a better sermon tomorrow. You're going to have to go work on it until you get it right." I mean, that's ridiculous, right? I would not be happy in my marriage if that was the case. But with our kids, we kind of sort of do that. When they struggle at school, we come home and then we double down in that struggle. Now, hear me out. If your kid is struggling with school, friends, or grades, whatever that might be, leave that outside of your home. Leave the house as a place to talk about it and to process it, a place where that can take a break from all the stress of it. When we create home into being a chronic place of stress, we're not providing our kids with a break from that stress. It just creates a bigger problem. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't process it and figure out what that problem is and try and help them, coach them out of it if they're ready to. But leave that problem at school or with their friends or with their hockey team. Don't invite that problem back into the home and have them kind of work on some delinquent skills. Another thing that I learned early on is to be conscious and maybe even hyper-conscious of what I am modeling as their mom. If I'm modeling and acting it out at home, you can expect to see some of those things. If I'm not dealing with something that's going on inside of me, you can expect that my kids are feeling and experiencing it too. Dealing with our own feelings and our emotions, what happens is that they carry over to our kids if we don't deal with them. When we say kids are resilient, often what we mean is that they're coping. that they're not actually dealing with the problems that are going on. And oftentimes I think that's true if we're not conscious of what we're just coping with and not dealing with what's going on in ourselves. And here's the last thing I want to teach you. When our kids screw up, it is awesome. It is such a good thing when our kids screw up. And this is why. Because every single one of those screw ups teaches them something that we can teach them while they are still in our home, while they are still under our roof. We only have 18 years to help them kind of work through all of those screw ups. Because once we don't have any control and they've become adults and moved off on their own, all we then have is influence. But we can't help them get right back on track. So even though it's kind of irritating or frustrating, as they boundary push all of us, is the chance for us to teach them how we want them to go. As parents and caregivers, I want you to remember this is a long game. This is an 18-year game. Sometimes when we're trying to raise a kid, we forget that we are raising a future adult. So don't shame yourselves or shame your kids when you make a parenting mistake. Instead, you can just own those parenting mistakes too. You see, I spent too much energy beating myself up in those early days when Chase was getting sent to the principal, all of those days. Some kids, they just need more direction. Some kids are just breaking boundaries because maybe that's how God created them to be. Now Chase, he's an adult, and he continues to still push boundaries. But now they're boundaries of like injustice and racism, broken systems that don't serve the people that they were created to serve. I think in some ways, Chase was made to push boundaries in a way that I still sort of sometimes get nervous about. And when he is working hard for the sake of others, using the same skills that once got him in trouble with the iPads at school, I can find myself now feeling so intensely proud of him as an adult. So if your kid is having troubles, I want to remind you today that you're doing a good job. That you are doing a good job. Please hear that again. You are doing a good job. And you don't do it alone. You see, God loves you and God entrusted your kids to you. But God didn't abandon you in it. God is with you in it. God has got you and our little troublemaking kids too.